All right, let's go ahead and walk through in depth the Biden administration's proposal for this down payment grant of $25,000. So we're going to walk through this document. It's in the description. It's super short, but it should clear up a lot of questions that you may have about this program. So this is called the Down Payment Toward Equity Act of 2021. And it's important to remember that this is a discussion draft. So this is the summary of the discussion draft. Basically, what still has to happen is this is going to be deliberated on, it's going to be discussed, then turned into a final bill that will then have to go through Congress and then get signed off to be able to actually be real in the world. Okay, so this is just a draft. It's important to keep that in mind. So when people ask, like, how do I apply? When do I do this? How do I get it right now? It's not available right now. This is just the conversation point inside of Congress. Okay, so first talk about the authorization here. So this is a grant program for states to be used for down payment assistance to first-generation homebuyers, and we'll cover what some of these definitions mean here in a second. As far as funding goes, it's interesting that they have no specified amount. It says Congress is authorized to appropriate what funding is necessary for fiscal years 2021 through 2030. So we can see the time horizon here. All right, 2021 to 2030. And basically what they're saying is they're going to take whatever funding is needed to go through these years. So it sounds like this is going to be adjustable. It's unclear if there's going to be a cap set on the amount of funding available for this as well. Also, this is going to be administered under the jurisdiction of HUD, so the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Of the total appropriated each year, HUD must use at least 5% to support housing counseling activities, and we'll explain that here in a little bit, going through the home buying course of sorts that they do require in this program. State administration, so any state receiving grants under this act must administer the funds through its state housing finance agency. So this is interesting because it's through the local state's HFA, and so whenever we introduce a third party like this through the home buying process, what we can do is the process can get slowed down a little bit more. So it's important to keep that in mind, that maybe getting grant approval may make a slower loan process as you go through it. And then the rest of this here is just a little bit more verbiage about that. Okay, so funds appropriated each fiscal year will be allocated by HUD based on a formula that takes into account each state's population, median area home price, and racial disparities in home ownership. HUD will reallocate any unused funding at the end of each fiscal year to states that demonstrate the capacity to use the money and that Treasury determines are meeting the program's goals. Okay, so use of funds and admin funds may be used solely to assist eligible homeowners purchase homes either through down payment assistance, closing cost assistance, or payments to reduce the interest rate on a mortgage. Assistance may be provided to homebuyers receiving assistance from other sources, including other federal, state, and local programs and private and nonprofit sources. So what's really interesting about this is I've had some people ask, like, well, can I couple other down payment assistance programs with it? And according to this, yes. So we could take some other down payment assistance program that we're using and add on top this bill as well. Of course, with the caveat that, like, it passes and goes through with all these same details, which we'll see if that ends up happening. But you can stack those programs on top of each other as long as the other DPA doesn't have an issue with it. Okay, and then grantees, which in this case would be each state's housing finance agency, may use no more than 5% of the grant amount for administrative and training costs. So basically the government would issue them the money, and then they would have to use 95% of that to actually be able to give out. Only 5% can be used for admin of the program that they issue. So now let's get back into some of the actual meat and bones of this thing, which is who is eligible for this program. And this has changed significantly from what we initially expected from the $15,000 tax credit for first-time buyers. So what this says is funds under this act can be provided to first-time buyers who meet income requirements and qualify as what the act terms first-generation home buyers. So I'm going to put everything first-generation here in green. So first-time homebuyers are those who have not owned a home in the prior 3 years. So that means you haven't been on title to a home in the past 3 years. As long as that's the case, you're technically a first-time buyer under this act. Now, regarding income, homebuyers must have an income at or below 120% of area median income. And I'm going to have a tool in the description where you can find area median income. So basically you just take the 100% area median income number and multiply it times 1.2. That's 120% of the area median income. And then for either the area where the home is being purchased is located or the area where the home buyer's place of residence is located, for home buyers purchasing homes in high cost areas, the income limit is increased to 180% of area median income. And so to do this, you're going to have to use a couple different tools. But in the description, I'll also put in the search lookup table for HUD's high cost of living areas. And then what you'll do is you'll use the other tool to find 180%. So just take the area median income times 1.8, and that gives you 180%. So that's the income limit. What narrows this act down quite a bit more is the first generation eligibility requirement. So what this is, the Act's definition of a first generation homebuyer is any individual whose parents or guardians never owned their home during the homebuyer's lifetime. And that's an interesting little detail here, homebuyer's lifetime. So they could have owned a home previously to that, but not during the homebuyer's life. And then also previously owned a home during the homebuyer's lifetime, but lost the home due to foreclosure, short sale, or deed in lieu of foreclosure, and don't currently own a home. So what I'm assuming that they're trying to put in here is recognizing what happened in 2008 when we saw the housing crash because of a lot of predatory loans, basically saying that those loans, that type of home ownership wouldn't count because it was seen as predatory. And then also an important detail here, is any individual who lived in foster care also qualifies as a first generation home buyer. Okay, so they're not going to go into trying to track down parents and their homeownership status. Now, a big question that people have had here is like, how are they going to know if my parents have ever owned a home? And so this is what is unclear. It's unclear exactly how they're going to do this. There's tons of data, and keep in mind, like when you buy a home, everything's put on public record. So it's not difficult for the government to find out if your parents have owned a home. Like there's a lot of data out there. So it's difficult to say whether they're going to require you to bring in proof of that or if they're going to look it up. It's really difficult to say here. So then we go to assistance limits. So homebuyers may receive up to $20,000 in assistance or $25,000. Let me change this color so it's less confusing. Or $25,000 in assistance if the homebuyer qualifies as socially and economically disadvantaged individual. And so what they go on to explain here is what classifies as socially and economically disadvantaged is any individual identifying as Black, Hispanic, Asian American, Native American, or any combination thereof will be presumed to meet this definition. And any individual who does not identify as such will have to prove by a preponderance of evidence that they are socially disadvantaged. Okay. So this is the part where, there are a lot of people who are on board and a lot of people who aren't on board. And so all I would ask is that, let's stay respectful in the comments of each other and recognizing this. And I'll touch on this a little bit here at the end, that I have an extra resource that you can look into if you're interested in kind of the why behind this program. So eligible mortgages here. Let me change some colors. So the program funds can be used to assist in the purchase of any home bought with a mortgage that is eligible for purchase by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So these are conventional loans. Is insured by either FHA or USDA, or meets the definition of a qualified mortgage. And if you're curious about that, you can just Google qualified mortgage. There's a couple details in there that have recently changed with QM loans and non-QM loans, but for the most part, people are going to be getting qualified mortgages. There's also a counseling requirement. So homebuyers receiving assistance under this act must complete a home purchase counseling program provided through a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. All right, and so this is where that 5% of funds can be allocated towards the admin and training of this program as well. States would be allowed to waive this requirement for homebuyers who meet specific underwriting criteria established by HUD. All right, and then One last detail here is any individual who receives a commitment for assistance under the program but whose mortgage application is denied shall be referred to a HUD-approved counseling agency for home purchase counseling. And so I saw a lot of people in the comments on the previous video who were saying, it doesn't make sense to give like money to people who can't qualify for loans. And it's important to remember that somebody still has to qualify for a loan to receive this grant. The grant is not about do you have the money or not. And the same thing with any down payment assistance program. It's not, oh, you can't afford a home, so we're going to just give you this big debt obligation that we think you can't pay back. The expectation is that absolutely somebody can still pay back this loan and be perfectly okay with having a mortgage. It's just assistance with the down payment. Or closing costs, or paying down the interest rate. And then finally here is the repayment of assistance. So home buyers receiving assistance under this act would be required to pay back all assistance they received if they stop occupying their home less than a year after purchase. The amount the home buyer would be required to pay back would decrease 20% for each year they live in the home, and there would be no penalty after 5 years. The penalty would be waived should the home buyer sell the home and realize a gain on the sale less than the amount they are required to repay. So basically, they're not going, if you sell the home, they're not going to chase down a debt of sorts, is basically what they're saying here is you need to pay it back if you have the money. If you sell it and you have to pay back a certain amount, you have enough to pay it back, you have to pay it back. But if you don't, they're not going to go chase you down for it if you didn't make any of that money up to pay it back. Okay, so a couple of questions that people have had in here that I saw in comments that are not addressed in here. Does this work retroactively? Like if I purchase a home now and then this becomes a thing, will it work? Right now it's unclear. My assumption is no, that it won't work that way. If it was a tax credit, it would work that way because it only happens when you file taxes. I'm just not seeing that being a thing. However, it could change, right? It's important to remember this is still a draft. This is still something that's living and breathing and moving and changing. And so there's no certainty about what's happening here. Also, should I wait for this? Should I go ahead and buy? I personally don't think that anybody should wait for a program like this because, again, it's still a draft. It's not even a fully prepared bill. So it has to become a full bill. We don't even know if these details are going to change at all. They might be completely different, right, by the time it actually gets pushed through. Then it has to go to the House and then to the Senate, and then it has to get signed and actually turned into a real thing. So I personally wouldn't advise waiting for it. If you have the means to purchase right now, I wouldn't want you to miss out on something in anticipation of this, because we don't even know if it's going to become a thing. Even if it becomes a full bill that gets introduced, it could get shot down in Congress. And for me, I don't want to count my future or somebody else's future on something that may or may not exist, especially in the early beginning stages. If this was actually fully introduced and maybe already passed half of Congress, yeah, maybe it might be a time to wait at that point. But at this stage, it just doesn't look like there's enough certainty to say waiting is a good option. And then finally, going into the why of this. And this is where it can get a little bit heated depending on your viewpoint of this draft and what's been introduced and what it's attempting to address as well. What I would suggest is looking up the podcast Stuff You Should Know. They have a really great episode on how housing discrimination works. And I think that if you could take maybe 40 minutes to listen to that while you're driving in the car, might help give you a really good perspective on what is the point of this bill. The point of this bill is a timeline that is much longer than just your parents to you. The timeline of this bill is actually looking at before your parents and after you. And listening to that podcast might give you a little bit more insight into why this bill is even being introduced, why it might be an option that could help with the home ownership wealth gap. All right. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to watch the other video that I have, I'll link that in the description. When this bill first came out, which was yesterday, I just put out a video talking a little bit more about the highlights of the program.